To redo our tips and tricks. So basically, I'm just going to casually go through some things that I think that most new users or returning users should know about Fantasy Grounds. These are things that I would probably have wished that I had known before. So without further ado, let's talk about the website. So this is the Fantasy Grounds official website. If you're going to use Fantasy Grounds for the first time and you've just downloaded the demo, you will need to create an account. So even though you're not buying anything and you're just logging into your GM as a guest, you still have to create an account. And once you do so, you can log into Fantasy Grounds. And if you are going to use the platform, when you install Fantasy Grounds, you want to make sure that you allow the firewall to go through from Fantasy Grounds to your computer. So if you don't do that, a lot of times when you try to connect to another person's computer, it will block your computer because your computer is trying to protect you. So essentially, if you don't allow the firewall and you also have your antivirus blocking Fantasy Grounds, that can be an issue sometimes. It's not always that, but that's usually the first place I'll start looking. The other thing is in your settings. If you click on settings in Fantasy Grounds, and you come to the back end, once you set up an account on Fantasy Grounds, you can use the same username and your password. You click login and then you click save. This little application UI scale, this kind of depends on your computer, your video card, and some of the things that go with having a larger monitor as opposed to a smaller monitor. So this is a permanent scale adjustment. So Fantasy Grounds Unity application UI scale is the size of the screen that Fantasy Grounds will try to use. The smaller you scale it, the more room you have. However, the text and all the related content in the theme gets smaller. So you kind of have to play with that and find out what's best for you. A lot of people have problems seeing the text, and there's really not a whole lot you can do about it. There is an extension. There's some font extensions on the Fantasy Grounds Forge, and those will have fonts that will make the chat window a little bigger, but not necessarily the entire interface. So there are some checks and balances in there that may or may not work for you depending on the size of your screen, the type of real estate you have, all those sorts of things. Ideally, a 14, 15, 17-inch monitor are going to be a little small, especially if you're the game master. However, if you're a player, those size screens might work depending on what you're doing. But generally speaking, if you have a really small monitor, it's really hard to see. And it's just something that either you'll have to accept or you'll have to play around with those settings for the UI scale. If you're having trouble, you can click on the troubleshooting tab. Here you can gather logs, you can show your setup, you can clear the vault. So the vault is basically all your downloaded content if you purchased anything. You can clear that out as a kind of a last resort to make sure that you don't have any corrupted downloads, because that does happen occasionally. You can clear your settings. I wouldn't do that very much. And then you can force an update. So even if you've already updated, or you want to check to see if the Forge has content that's that needs to be updated, then you can use that. Once you're done with your settings and you're done playing around with that, here's where you put your license key. Go ahead and hit save. And I'm going to go to launch Fantasy Grounds, and that'll bring me to the screen. So these are kind of like just little things I wish I had known, in the beginning. The other thing is I'm going to go ahead and start Fantasy Grounds, but one thing I wanted to mention is if you're the GM or you're just kind of checking things out, try not to load too many extensions. These actually extend or add functionality to Fantasy Grounds, but I would really reserve most of that for when you get more familiar, so you understand how it affects your system, how it interfaces with Fantasy Grounds and the rule set you're using, those sort of things. So I have quite a few here that I've tested out that I've used over the years, but I don't use that many. Typically, this is what I have. I'll have a theme. I'll have that font that I had mentioned, the Roboto Revised, and then I might have one other. There isn't usually any need to have a ton of extensions unless that is something that you've built up to. So if you need some more quality of life features, that's essentially what those are. Some of them do actually add a little bit more functionality to Fantasy Grounds, but all in all, you don't need those to make Fantasy Grounds work. They're just kind of convenience things, or maybe a little bit of automation that can't be achieved by the basic logic. But in general, most rule sets are at least 65, 70% done. You don't have to do a whole lot to it, as opposed to other virtual tabletops where you have to install tons of mods and extensions and all kinds of things. So Fantasy Grounds does need a little bit of modding, I think, occasionally, but it normally, I don't think you need, 10 or 12 or 13. Quite often I'll see people that'll load some sort of extension and they'll leave it on, and it's only for one character for one spell, and the other times they won't even need it. So for example, I have one in here. It is called the rolling, what is it? The rolling mirror image. So if you have a character that casts the mirror image spell, that's great for that. It handles that better because it's a real pain in the butt to handle during gameplay. However, if you're going to use it and you don't have any characters that are using that spell in particular, there's no need to load it. So if you're going to be a GM and you got a ton of extensions, just load the ones you need. You don't need every single thing loaded, and quite often those conflict and they break. So, you might as well save yourself a little bit of headache. So those are things that you'll learn as you start using Fantasy Grounds. I'm not saying that extensions are bad, just use them sparingly and kind of get to know things before you start piling them on. That's the only thing I could say, especially if you're new. Even if you're experienced, I've found that chasing updates and worrying if my next session's going to crash and all that stuff, I guess I just got tired of it. I basically kind of pared everything down. I just only use what I need. I try to keep it simple. So the other thing is, I wanted to mention is, if you're going to develop content for Fantasy Grounds, let's say you're creating a new campaign, you're going to start a game with your friends, I would seriously make 2 campaigns. I would make one where you're playing, that's where you connect, that's where you do all your stuff. Once you have that set up, make a copy of it, and on the back end, in your campaigns folders, you can make a copy of it and then put -work. So let's just say this was your game. Make a copy of that entire folder and then put _work or something like that. So this will be, there'll be your live campaign and then like your backup campaign, and that's also where you do all your work. If you work inside of the game or the campaign folder that you're working in, it's okay, but just keep in mind that if you want to add content or create modules, or maybe you want to save some of the work that you're doing in your campaign to transfer to a different game, if you're doing that in the same campaign folder that you're working out of, or that you're playing out of, that could be problematic down the road. So initially it's not a problem, but when your campaign grows and you got a lot of changes and things that you've made, if you want to save those, it's much easier to do that and to manage it from a separate campaign folder than trying to do it all in one campaign. And the reason for that is any updates or changes that you want to see or view, you're going to want to start a new campaign anyways to see the changes and to see how it looks in a different session. If you load that up in the same session, the new updates won't show because if you've already rendered as a module, those do not show up, and Fantasy Grounds always shows the oldest content. So if you've made changes a month ago and then you decided that you want to update your content and then you export it as a module and then you try to see it in the same session, it will show the older stuff. It won't show the changes. So that can get confusing. So then you think you're doing something wrong, and that sends you down the wrong path. So if you create another separate campaign and work in that area and then play in the other, it makes it much easier in the long run. In the short term, you won't notice, but as you make changes, add content, all those sort of things, you want to back up your campaign folder anyways, and you can use that as kind of like your work folder, and you can test all your stuff, and you can create your content there instead of doing it in your main campaign. That way you can test extensions, you can export stuff, and you can test things out before you put it in your live campaign. And you'll have kind of like a backup. So it's kind of an important thing to have a backup anyways. But if you're going to make content and you want to export it into a module later, once you figure out how to do that, then it's going to be a lot easier for you down the road. I wish I had known that, because there was times where I was building content and I'd try to export it and I was loading it in the same campaign where I made it, and that just totally messed me up. Like, Fantasy Grounds will not display the new changes. Even if you have 3 variations of the same module and it's basically the same thing just with a few changes on it, Fantasy Grounds will look at the oldest content, and it's not looking at the title of your module. It's looking at what's in the module and the header data and the XML data. So even if you call it session 1, session 2, session 3, you have those all loaded in one campaign, it's not going to show the newest stuff. So that's a real, it's a head scratcher, because it can really mess you up. Let's put it that way. So that's just a kind of a tip that I wish I had known. Like, when I was starting my campaign, I wish I would have had a separate folder or a separate campaign where I could do all my work in. So that might be something that you want to do later. It is a little annoying that you have to exit out and go back into a different campaign. But once you get used to the routine and the fact that you can copy and paste over to your other campaign, it's not that big of a deal. But it can be annoying to have to keep unloading and loading Fantasy Grounds. However, it's even more annoying when your campaign data gets corrupted and when everything gets screwed up. So, pick your battles as far as that goes. So I'm going to go ahead and load into Fantasy Grounds. So my biggest tip here was to keep your extensions down, and sheer volume of content is another consideration. I have so many different third-party extensions, modules, art packs, frickin' you name it. I got so much stuff that it causes a lot of issues for my campaign. So right now, this load time could be decreased a tiny bit if I would kind of go through all my stuff and get rid of it. So there isn't a whole lot that I need during most campaign sessions. I might need some cool assets for like a map that I want to build. But other than that, having like 10,000 tokens when you can only use a dozen in your campaign session, or having 50 gazillion maps pieces that you want to put together, like tiles and stuff, you usually don't need all that stuff. It is something that you would probably load just in case, but a lot of times the just in case becomes greater than what you actually need, and it just becomes a burden. It slows things down, and it causes lag and load time issues sometimes when you have a ton of content. And I'm the worst for that. If I go into my assets folder and look at this thing, it's ridiculous. To be honest, I'm a little bit embarrassed. I have so much crap that once you start going down this path, it's so hard to go back and fix it and organize it, because what happens is you got things that are connected to your other campaigns, like images and stuff, and if you move those around and you change the titles or you switch folders, you have to refresh Fantasy Grounds so that it can re-look up your content, but it also can break your link. So if you have a map that's linked to another module and you forgot what it went to, and then you go to move it and stuff, it can break that. So these are things that you want to kind of consider up front or towards the beginning of your career with Fantasy Grounds, is manage your content. Don't just dump a whole folder of stuff in there, especially if it doesn't have good file names and identifiers. So that's another thing, is I'll have a map that's like X372958. I have no freaking idea what that is. You can rename it in Fantasy Grounds, but it's better to name the files in the folder before you add the content in the Fantasy Grounds. So asset management actually does help in the long run. The short term, you probably won't care. And in the beginning, it's not going to seem like a big deal. But as time goes on, if you stick with Fantasy Grounds, you're going to want to kind of get used to managing your content as you go, as opposed to just dumping a whole bunch of stuff in there and kind of turning your head, because it really doesn't help you that much. I know that a lot of people like to have stuff just in case, but honestly, just in case becomes a burden. It doesn't help a whole lot, and all it does is just clutter up your campaigns and your assets, and it makes it harder on you in the long run. So for instance, when you go to search for something, I'm just going to search for goblin. This is probably the worst thing for me to search for, because goblin is going to exist in 50 gazillion different folders, and it's going to be all over the place. So I'm going to hit goblin just to show you an example. So I hit enter, it kind of freezes, right? Because Fantasy Grounds has to go in here and parse through all of my content to bring up anything that says goblin. And that's probably the worst search term I can ever use in this case. So it's in bags, it's all these loose pictures, it's maps, it's items, it's almost embedded in everything. So that can cause a little bit of lag when you're searching. Now, SmiteWorks has recently, in the last 6 months, made this a little bit better. So it actually caches these thumbnails a lot better than it used to. It used to be a lot worse. It used to hesitate for like 30 seconds to a minute trying to go through all of your stuff and to list these thumbnails. So every time you add a bunch of content, it has to build these thumbnails so that you can see this. And when you click this arrow to go to the next page, it's kind of it's pausing because I have so much crap. So do yourself a favor and don't dump in 50 million things. Like, how many times should I have this goblin picture? It's in like 50 gazillion modules. So you would think I should only need 1 or 2, but it's actually embedded in like 50,000 different things. So I don't know why this goblin exists in every single thing here, but these are all the D&D official modules. So it's not very efficient when it comes to utilizing a file name and associating it with just one picture. It's got to be repeated a million times because it belongs to a certain module. So there's some redundancy there that I wish could be taken care of. But for now, just to keep things on the download to keep it safe, is don't put 50 gazillion tokens that have, weird titles, or maybe every single one of them says goblin or something like that. That's where things kind of get kind of dicey after a while. You won't notice it up front, but after a while, it can be a real pain in the butt. So that's just kind of a word of caution about assets, maps, tokens, portraits. Those sort of things are nice to have. And it is kind of a just in case thing, right? Because you never know what you're going to need when you're going to need it. But if you do a little bit of prep and you have everything kind of set, you usually don't need much of anything. And as a matter of fact, unless you're doing a lot of homebrew, most of the modules have everything in you need. So if you're not using a bunch of homebrew content, you don't need to load 50 gazillion things. That also comes true with modules. So you want to keep this kind of minimal. When you're first connecting and you have players making characters, yes, you're going to need more books. You're going to need the player's handbook or the core rule book, and maybe a couple additional ones for options. You might need one for backgrounds. You might need a module for races. You might need one for equipment. But once that character is built, generally speaking, you can start unloading those. Unless it has a spell or something unique to that character, you don't need it after first level. Generally speaking, you get all your stuff at first level, and then after that, when you level up as far as your class goes, that's when you need those other books occasionally. But you don't need every single book loaded at all times. So that is something that you want to consider. Because when you're building characters, it's going to be a little bulky and cumbersome at first, but once you're done with first level characters, you don't need all those books. You might need a couple. So the player's handbook or the core book of whatever rule set you're using, and maybe one additional book. After that, you can unload the rest. Unless you're going to build characters and keep making characters. That might be an exception. Once in a while, when you level up, you're going to need one of those extra books, but generally speaking, you don't need them. The other thing is having map packs that you're not going to use. So there's a lot of third-party content out there, like DM's Guild stuff, which is really nice. It can really add and enhance your games. However, if you're not going to use it, or you don't find yourself, opening them up and checking them out while you're playing, you might as well unload those too. So anything you can do to reduce your overhead is going to be helpful in the long term. So yeah, it may be kind of a pain in the butt to have to, do a little bit of prep and search. Hey, good evening. How you doing, Ship of Fools? Nice to see you. But do a little research, take a little time, and figure out what you actually need. If you're just gonna load everything under the sun, eventually that's gonna catch up to you. It's gonna cause lag and all kinds of stuff. It'll possibly cause your players to not be able to connect. There's all kinds of things that go wrong, and it's a limitation of network. It's a limitation of the Unity engine, and there's a physical limitation as well. You're going to run into this under any circumstances with any platform. So even if you use Foundry or Roll20, you're still going to face this same issue eventually. So it's not going to really matter. It's not just a Fantasy Grounds issue. It's an issue that all platforms suffer from eventually. So this is kind of where you manage your rule sets. Right now, I just have these SRD modules and this map pack because these are what comes with the base of Fantasy Grounds. So even if you haven't purchased any content and you just have a basic license, that's the kind of stuff you'll get. And these are just kind of to test things out. I use it like when I'm building content. I'll just load these because they're very lightweight. They don't have a lot of artwork, and they're just the data essentially. That's the difference between this kind of content that comes with the platform and then the purchase stuff. So if I load the player's handbook, I don't need the SRD data. If I load the monster manual, I don't need the bestiary because the bestiary is almost the same thing. It just doesn't have all the fancy pictures and it's missing maybe a quarter of the monsters. The SRD magic items usually comes out of either the module you're in or in the Dungeon Master's Guide. So if you have the Dungeon Master's Guide in your module, you usually don't need this SRD magic items. So the only time I would use these is if I was missing one of those 3 books. This map pack comes with Fantasy Grounds. It's been part of the legacy of Fantasy Grounds. It's around since the classic days. These are just a bunch of test images that you can use if you want to try out Fantasy Grounds. So for instance, here's this Underdark Tunnels map, and it kind of just provides you with a way to kind of play around with Fantasy Grounds and not have to necessarily go in and buy the Lamborghini. So if you unlock this map, what you'll find is you have these options up here. Make sure that the line of sight is turned on, because if this already has line of sight built into it and they're not on, it's not going to work the way you think. So I'm going to drag all of these individual NPCs onto the map, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So here's the map. I'm going to drag these NPCs. So I'm just going to grab the hostile group here. And I grabbed all those at once. Boy, I wish I would have known that. This is something that saves you a little time. So if you need to put the entire group on manually, you can do that with this little helmet or whatever the symbol is, depending on your theme. You can do it individually. Like I can drag this roper and put them on the map like this. Oops, wrong one. So I take the roper, drag his icon on here. So that's his icon. Well, if I would have known ahead of time that I could do it in a group, that would have been handy to know. Because for the longest time, I was doing individual drags instead of doing the whole group. So another thing is when you claim a token as a GM, you're going to see their light source that they have, if they have one on them. Like this guy has a candle. These guys do not. So if you don't have the line of sight on, which is these settings here under the play mode, they'll be able to see through walls. They won't be able to, this won't block their movement. So make sure those are on. Occasionally we'll get someone who says, hey, the players can see the whole map. Well, sometimes it's because they don't have this stuff turned on. Or it could be the map doesn't have it, period. So what I mean by that is if you click on line of sight, this is all the occluders that are involved here. So this would be something that, that you'll have to get used to. But essentially, these are the types of things that you'll come across when you are using a map. And as the game master, you have to click on the token. And if you're in this edit mode, you can't interact with the tokens because they're on the top layer. So you have to go to play mode. So in play mode, I can interact with these. So as I come in here, I can kind of see what's going on because I'm in the game master view, which kind of can show you everything. It's kind of like an overview. But if you turn on the player mode, this is what the player is going to see, provided you are that player. So in this case, I'm this bandit captain and I can see where I'm going because I have a candle. However, if I'm a player and I don't have dark vision or some sort of magical light, I can't see jack diddly. So they have to have a light source, or there needs to be a torch or something inside the area they're at. That can get a little confusing too. I've seen people go, oh, my player can't see anything. Well, no, because they don't have light and there's no ambient light source that they can see unless they're close enough to like their leader here, which they'd have to stick close so they can see what they're doing. So this NPC over here, the roper, if I click on his token, he's got dark vision. That's why it's black and white. So he can see in the dark, but these guys cannot. And when you're advancing the combat tracker, like this down arrow, it's gonna move the turn order, but it doesn't move the vision. So this roper, I have to click on him to see what he sees. So this is the player mode, what the player would see. And if you use the Control P, you can toggle between the views. So I usually run mine in player preview mode, and then when I need to see the entire map, I'll hit Control P occasionally, and it's temporary, so you just kind of toggle. This allows for you to basically get an idea, a bird's eye view of what's going on. And the reason I leave it in player preview mode, because anytime I claim a token, or if I click on an NPC or something, I can get a better idea of what they're seeing. If I do it in the overall GM mode, it's kind of harder to tell. That's why I don't use it. But this is the way it was intended to be used. I'm kind of using it backwards, so I kind of have it like that. And then if I need to move a token around, that's basically how that works. Next thing I want to cover is movement. So there are some game systems that vary, but in general, there is a setting in Fantasy Grounds where you can change the diagonal movement if that applies to your rule set. So what I'm going to do is go into GM mode just so it's not darked out like that so we can see, and go to options. And if you scroll down towards the bottom under the house rules, there's this map movement diagonal distance. I have it set to 1.5, but if you have it set to default, what happens is when you move diagonally, it's counted as square per square. And some rule sets, that's fine, it doesn't matter. But if you want to look at it mathematically, or how's it going, Sundance? Hi, pretty good. So if you want to look at this mathematically, if you move this token from here to there, you're actually moving 1.5 times. So it's a Pythagorean's theorem here. So if you don't have that switched over or changed, they're going to move actually further, 1.5 times further. So if they move 30 feet diagonally, they're actually moving 45 feet. And I'll show you what I'm saying. So if I have that off and you hold down the Alt key as the game master, this keeps track of how far you move. This says 20 feet and the setting is on default. So I didn't change anything. This is what when it starts, it's like that. Now, if I switch that, it will change this number. So let me go to 1.5. So it's actually 25 feet if I'm moving this direction diagonally, and if you're counting every other square as 10 feet. So if you look at a triangle, the two shortest sides, if you're going left, right, north, south, east, west, it's fine. But when you move diagonally, it changes. So this could be something that you want to set depending on the rule set. Some games don't care about that as much. Maybe if you're using, I don't know what the rules are for some of the other rule sets, but it might change a little bit. So you may not have to do that. But this is just a case of where, if you want it to be a little bit more accurate and you don't want them to move, more than they should per round, that would be a way to take care of that. The other thing to know is once you start dragging a token, you don't have to hold down the Alt key the whole time. So as the game master, you can let go of the Alt key and continue the movement, and it will keep that thing moving until they're done moving, and then you can hit the approval here. If you don't like their movement, or if they're moving through an enemy or something like that, you can deny it by clicking on the X. In this case, I'll go ahead and approve it, except for that he's moving too far. But let's just say he announced he wanted to use a dash maneuver. So he can move roughly 60 feet. So I'll go ahead and allow that. So go ahead and hit this green plus button. So he's kind of doing a serpentine move there. So that's how you approve movement. You can do multiples. So if you use this little drop down toggle thing here, and then you go to, let's see, there is a way that you could select multiple targets. So here's target mode. You can left click and do that, so you can multi-target. And then there's also a way that you can move everyone at once. So if I go to let's see, you can go and highlight all of those individuals to move at once. So see if I can emulate that. It's been such a long time that I forget. But you can highlight all of these different tokens. See, I'm in target mode right now. I need to get out of that. There we go. So basically, you can highlight all of the tokens if you get into the correct mode. So let me see. Player vision, player view, death markers, target enemy units, target friendly. Okay, here we go. Selection mode. So if you select all of these targets here, and then you hit this Alt key, and you start dragging it, it will do them all at once. So you can move things in groups if you want to. Not very common that you have to do that, but if you need to move a whole army at once, that could be kind of helpful in the beginning at least, until they engage in battle. But you got to approve each one, individually, but you can kind of get them all to move in unison. So that might work if you're in a big battle or something like that. But very rare that comes up, but you can do it. The other thing about these maps that can be annoying is where you have them located. So it's kind of important to always put a place, like have them in a spot where you always kind of need it. So I usually put mine up here in the top right corner. If you want to recenter the map, like get it zoomed back into its original size, you can right click, go to view, and zoom to fill or zoom to fit. We'll recenter it. Then you lock it, and now you're back to business here. If you need to, you can also use these arrows, zoom to fit here, because that will recenter the map. When you zoom in, that is something that you'll pick and choose when you need to do it. However, Fantasy Grounds has a setting that's on by default, and that's up here in the per user settings. So you have this thing called auto center map. So if that's turned on, what happens is, let's just say you're this NPC down here, okay? And you got the map zoomed in. It's his turn. Well, if that's off, or excuse me, if that's turned on, which is what it normally is in the default mode, and you go to advance the tracker, it moves the whole map. So go ahead and move again. So see, it moves it around. That may or may not be good for you. So as a player or a GM, you can change that, and it will keep the map from moving or being recentered like that, because it's trying to center on the token, the turn of the token. That might be helpful, but if you're a GM and you got everything laid out, and you can see everything, and you don't want it to move, you turn that off, and that way it won't move on you. So when you advance the tracker, it's not going to move to recenter. You can do it yourself manually. For a player, you can leave that on. It might be helpful to you. It just depends on your familiarity with the system. So keep the map in a certain area, and just remember, whenever you open a new image, a new window, new data, anything new, let's just say, for instance, items, it's going to be right in the center, okay? So the first time you open it, it's always going to be in the center. Once you have moved it, though, so if you're going to move that over here, or let's say you want it to come up here next time you need it, when you close this and you go to open it back up, it's going to go where you left it. And if you want to come back to the same setup the next time you log in, you got to go into the settings, and you want to turn on the desktop restore Windows on start. So if you leave it like this and you exit Fantasy Grounds, technically this should come back up exactly the way you left it. So let's test it. So the correct way to exit out of Fantasy Grounds is to right click, go to exit session, and you want to click on return to launcher. If you've made a lot of changes, or you're moving stuff around, or perhaps you're writing something, don't just click on the X on the top right corner. You want to right click, go to exit session, and then return to launcher. That's the best way to do it. Fantasy Grounds saves every 5 minutes. If you click on the X button while it's in the middle of saving, it can corrupt your data. So, or if you accidentally do it or something happens to your machine, like maybe you have a power outage, it'll corrupt your data in your campaign folder, and you might have to start over, or you might have to go back a day or two to recover. So there are ways to do that, but it can be a real pain, especially if you've made a lot of edits in 5 minutes, which you can. So if I go back into that campaign, technically all those windows that I had open should be there where I left them. You have to leave them open. It's not going to remember if you close it. This is a function that was covered by Windows Saver X when, and Classic was a thing. This was recently added within the last month. So it will allow for you to kind of save the state of the windows that you had open at the time when you exited. But if you close all your windows and exit, it's going to leave it that way. Just remember that whenever you open a new window for the first time, it's always going to go smack dab in the middle of everything. Once you move it, resize it, put it where you want it, it should stay there regardless if you dismiss it or bring it back up. I see a lot of bad habits, and I'm guilty of it too, where let's just say I need the space behind here. So instead of closing this, I'll move it out of the way, open up something else, put it there, and then I'll close the map. So if I move this somewhere else and close it, that's where it's going to open again. So I'm going to go ahead and bookmark this. So I'm going to left click and drag this little hotkey down to the hot bar down here. That way I can recall this image so I don't have to look for it. I'll go ahead and close it. Now, if I click on that, it's going to put it where I left it. But the bad habit I see is instead of closing it or making a bookmark for it and then closing it, I'll see someone do this, and then they'll move this up here, then they'll close this. Anyone guess where that's going to show up again when I need the map? Right where I don't want it. It's going to cover something else. So it's going to be there. So if you know that ahead of time, that you place the windows, stretch them where you want them to go, and leave them there, and then when you no longer need them, you close them. So in this case, I'm going to move this back here, and I'm going to move this back here and leave it there. When I don't need it, I'll just close the window. If you need to recall it, you make a shortcut down here so you don't have to go hunting around for it. So that's how you kind of manage the windows and make it a lot easier on yourself. It can drive you absolutely nuts if you don't know that. This is something I wish I knew. It took me a long time to wrap my head around that. And I don't know why it took so long, because I had it for 2 years and I was still doing that. So it took me a while to go, okay, I'm tired of this. What am I doing wrong here? And I finally kind of figured it out. I didn't realize that when you open a brand new window, that it always opens in the middle. See, these obviously weren't brand new. But once you understand that, you move the window, you resize it. So in other words, you change the frame size that you want, and then you leave it. And if you want to recall it easier, you can always drag and drop it to the hotkeys. And if you have several things that you want to open all the time, or something you need to access, you can make notes in your computer or in Fantasy Grounds under Player Notes. Under Notes, you can make a run list. So you can make this like your load list. So if you don't rely on that automatic load feature and you kind of want to keep a clean desk, you can make this load list. You can number it if you want. So I'll go 00.00 just so I have a kind of an order here in case I have other notes. And you can link all of these things to this area here. So what I'll do is, instead of trying to find everything after your next session, you can take all of these different things here and make that your load sheet. So this is the party sheet. I've moved that before, or this is the effects. Let me load up the party sheet. So here's the party sheet. I want that to appear down here when I need it. So the party sheet will go here. And next time I load it, that's where it's going to go. So I'm going to close it. The map is right here. That will go where I want it. The note section, I'm just going to leave it here for now. And this actual note, I'm going to take this and left click and drag down to the hotkeys. So this has all the stuff that I want to load on my next session. So if I come back to this clean desk and I want to recall everything, I can bring up my load list, which is my notes, and just click on the links, and that brings everything up. So you can do it that way too. You don't have to rely on that auto loader. So it just depends on how clean you want things to be and that sort of thing. So this kind of gives you more flexibility and less of these shortcuts down below. So you can have this to kind of have a load order. Kind of reminds you too of what you did last time. You can also use this as your journal. You do all kinds of stuff with it. So this is just a way to kind of manage the windows and to have kind of like a cheat list here. So you can even do this with NPCs. So if you bring this over and you want to remember the types of NPCs that you had introduced in battle, you can take these shortcuts and link them here and use those next time you do another encounter. And this is kind of like a note, right? So you go, oh yeah, last time this is what I used. And that'll be part of your load list. So you kind of have a loadout process sometimes if you want. It may be unnecessary depending on your campaign and what you're doing, but I think this is a good way to go. And it also eliminates having like 12 different shortcuts down here. This kind of ties everything up that has to do with this session. So you can do this per session. This might be session 0. So this is 00. Your next note, you can have another note, and that one might be session 2. So for every session, you can have your own notes list, and then you can actually link session 1 to session 2, so it's easy to recall. So maybe I'll link this note to this note, and then I'll have different things on here. Or maybe I'll steal a couple of these. Maybe I'm using the same map in my second session, so I'll drag that map over here just so I have it handy for myself. So you don't have to reinvent the wheels. There's a lot of ways to manage the windows and to make it more efficient for yourself, so you're not constantly looking and trying to figure stuff out. And just remember, again, if I bring up a new image, guess where it's going? So I'm going to bring up a new map. Okay, so here's the battle maps. If I bring up a map that I haven't clicked on yet and moved, it's going to go right here in the center. So here's the streets image, right smack dab in the middle. If I'm going to use that in my next session, in addition to this other map, what I can do is take this, drag it, and kind of center it over this one, and then use that as my shortcut. So next time I recall this, it's right where I want it to be. And I can take this and put it on my cheat sheet down here if I want. So maybe I'm going to use this on my next session. So I can drag and drop this in here. And then next time I come back, I don't need to go through that. You know, if I accidentally close these, I can bring up those maps again. So I can bring that up, and I can bring up the image of the streets again. The other thing you can do is maybe on this map, you're going to go to the next map. So maybe inside of this pool is there's a water pool in here. So what you can do with that is you can link this map to here, and you can link this map to wherever it goes on the map here. So now when you're playing and you're in the middle of combat and you need to switch maps, you can click this, it brings that up, and if you need to go back, it clicks to the other map. So you can link things back and forth to make it convenient for yourself. Man, I wish I would have known that ahead of time. But these are just little things that really add up in a game session. So you start practicing these types of methodologies of organizing your sessions and learning the interface and how it kind of works together and how it fights you and all those things. That will help you a lot. It'll help you immensely. So those are just things that, wow, if I would have known that before, this would have been a lot easier on me. So, and some of these apply mostly to the game master, but even as a player, You keep your desktop kind of clean and organized. So normally, like these NPCs, when I'm playing and I have this selected here, and I bring up the stat block, it's going to be in the middle. So you might as well, before you start, put all these in a spot where you can get to them, and you're able to access them without having to move them in the middle of a session. Because that can, it's okay if you got one or two, but if you got a bunch of them, that can be annoying. So before you start, just take all these like a deck of cards, kind of stack them together here. And when it comes to down to playing, and when you have your players connected, you can have them all over here stacked up. And let's say the bandit captain. So if I click on this link on the right, it brings his NPC sheet to the top. When I go down to the next actor, I can click on this link, it brings it up to the top. So that way, when you're going through this progression here, you can see the NPC sheet as you need it. You don't normally need too many side-by-side character sheets. It's very rare that you have to compare. So if you stack them all up here and you have it where you can see it, it's so much easier. So if I hit the down arrow, I'm going to click on this link, it brings that up. So it's so much easier to manage your games when you have a system. You can kind of differ a little, like you don't have to do it exactly the way I have it. But once you understand that, yeah, this is organized. Yeah, it's definitely helpful. It's something that, has pissed me off for a long time. A lot of people say, I fucking hate Fantasy Grounds. The goddamn interface is a piece of shit. And, it's mostly because I didn't know how it was behaving. I didn't use it enough. I didn't know what the hell was going on. I had no clue. It is still cramped. Don't get me wrong. There's some things that can be fixed, definitely. But if you utilize it the way it was designed, it's a lot easier, a lot less frustrating, and there isn't really an excuse. Yeah, you have to put some time in for sure. So another thing you can do is on the right-hand side, once you're used to what these menu items are, you can collapse the sidebar. It gives you a little bit more room, not a lot, but a little bit. And you can collapse it even further. I usually have it collapsed just this first time, so I can still see the icons, and that generally, gives me a little bit of room if I need it. So when you are resizing the windows here, you'll kind of lose some of your space, but nonetheless, that's kind of managing your desktop space essentially. When you're playing around a desktop, you don't normally have all the books laid out in some people do, but most people just have a stack of books and then they open them as they need them, or they might have a couple stacks. You don't normally have a book over here open, a book over there open, a book behind you open. There's no way that you can actually access all those books at once. So when people complain about having a window that breaks off to the side, it's nice. I wish it could do that, but it doesn't. So you have to kind of work with the way it's set up and designed. And once you understand the Windows placement, it helps a little bit. Doesn't get rid of the clutter. There's still pretty busy once you're done organizing it. However, if you learn how it works, it's not as bad. So it's not an excuse for poor UX design, but it is definitely a step in the right direction. And to be honest, this was inherited when SmiteWorks purchased the platform. It's always kind of been this way. Now, that's not always good, but it is what it is. I can't do anything about it. So I've invested a lot of money into it. I'm going to use it to the best ability that I can and kind of work with it. So this is something that you can do to kind of organize your desktop to make things easier, a lot more conducive to playing instead of farting around looking for stuff all the time. So anyway, so this is just kind of some tips I wish I had known long ago. So hopefully these will help you in the long run. And you can have all the criticism and stuff you want. I don't care. I don't work for SmiteWorks, so I'm kind of independent. I'm like you. I use the software. I kind of learned its quirks. I learned its weaknesses, its strengths. I learned what not to do, and that's all I'm doing. Specific question about 5e. You were talking about extensions and how they're not needed. Are the effect extensions available on DM's Guild redundant now? Yeah, most of them. There's a few still left on there. Some of Matacure's extensions, for some reason, they wouldn't let SmiteWorks put them on the store, on the Forge. And that's probably because they make money. So most, if not all, of the extensions have moved over, but there are a few of Matacuries that are still on the DM's Guild. And I don't remember exactly what they are, but they have something to do with Robbie's effects coding and that sort of thing. But most of that stuff is moved over to the Fantasy Grounds Forge. So what he's asking me is, if you go to the website and you want to use community content, most of that stuff used to be held on the DM's Guild. So if I go to the DM's Guild, a lot of those third-party options were built and put on the DM's Guild because that was the only way they could do it. It's still kind of like that. So if you use Forgotten Realms content, you still have to build that on the DM's Guild. However, if it's generic or it's an extension or whatever, you put it on the Fantasy Grounds Forge. But this is the DM's Guild. This is where a lot of third-party stuff is. So if you use the filter down here, click on Virtual Tabletop, and then you click on Fantasy Grounds. This will show you all the Fantasy Grounds modules. So there's a few on here that are still part of this DM's Guild. So like Rob Tui's effects coding is still on here. There's a few others, like this Critically Awesome Essentials is still on here. So there's a handful of them that are still on here, especially if they're adventures and not extensions. A lot of those are still on here. So these are third-party extensions that you can download relatively cheap, depending on what they are, and they kind of add extra content. And most of these now are modules. However, if you go to the Fantasy Grounds website, drop down the store menu, and you go to the Forge, these are kind of like your mods, your third-party content that the community makes. A lot of these are free. Not all of them cost. Here's another thing I wish I had known. I just found this out. I've been using this thing for probably, I don't know, maybe, a year, however long the store has been out. There's a search filter up here. If you click on that, you can drop this down. Show owned. So I had that off. That's by default. If you click on show owned and you search here, now you'll be able to show the stuff that you have already. What I was doing before is I was going to my inventory and trying to figure out all the stuff that I had and trying to figure out which it was. So if I wanted to refer somebody to like this NPC flavors, I had to come back here. And there's no search field here. I had to go through this whole list to figure out what I had. So in the main shop area, when you go back to the shop, if you go to that filters, which is this little thing here, it's kind of hard to notice, and you click on that, click on show owned, and when you do a search in here, it'll show everything, even the stuff you purchased. If that's not selected, all of the stuff you have purchased will be in your inventory and kind of hidden out of sight. So this can be annoying if you're trying to go back and remember the stuff that you have from this store. So wish I would have known that, but I just found that out, and I think Smiteworks is going to make this a little bigger, so it's a little bit more obvious. And I think they're going to turn the default on to show owned, and then if you don't want the store to show you stuff you already have, then you would click on this. It makes it easier if you're going to refer somebody else. Let's say you wanted to link this, and you don't have to go through your whole library to figure out where it is. It'll be here. However, if you don't care about that, you can turn that off, and it'll only show you the stuff that you don't have. So that's kind of an important thing. I wish I would have known that. I mean, I just found that out, and I'm learning stuff every day. I don't know everything. I just know what not to do. And what not to do is to not pay attention and not know that's there, and then try to go through your inventory and figure out what you have. Because at this point, going through like 29 pages of stuff is not fun. So just keep that in mind. Use that filter, and then you can also use it to filter out stuff that you don't want. So if you're looking for something specific, you can come here. You can go to the sort. You can go from newest to oldest, oldest to newest, and then you can do product type. You want rule set, accessory, adventure, extensions, so you can just go with extensions, and it will only show me the extensions. So a lot of these are free, not everything. I don't know if there's a free filter. Is there? Let's see, all categories. Oh, okay, you got 5e. Okay, you can filter by rule set, kind of. I don't see, I wish they had a filter in here that was like only show free stuff, but anyways, maybe there is and I just passed it up. No. But anyway, so this is just tips that I wish I would have known. Fantasy Grounds store. So let's go to that. You go to shopping, let's say, you're going to take advantage of something or whatever. So if I purchase this Tome of Horrors and it goes to, I'm going to buy it, let's say, and I will probably eventually. Your shopping cart gets updated. You hit OK. Come over here to your cart and you go to the checkout. Here's the price. So I'm getting this for full price, no sale, no deal. Okay, it's a brand new item. That's one reason why. And you could also qualify for a discount or a bundle price or maybe a weekly sale or some sort of affiliate thing where you've purchased all the modules. The discount doesn't show until you put it in your cart. So that's something that people get turned off by because they don't realize that. And when they're going in to buy it, they go, oh crap, I'm not getting no deal. But when you actually add it to your cart, it does give you the discount if you qualify for it. So what qualification has to do with if you already own it, if it's on sale, or it's part of a bundle, or there could be a seasonal discount where they have just a big, and those things stack too, by the way. So I already have this book of Eventides, but if I go to buy it, let's say if I wanted to rebuy it again, probably wouldn't do that, but I'm going to go to my cart and I'm going to go to the checkout and I'm getting $9.80 off of it because it's on sale. Sometimes though, that doesn't show up until you're in the cart. So it's kind of obvious here. I'm saving $9. This is an actual weekly sale. But if you have like the Pathfinder bundle, that may add even more to it. So it just depends on what you own already, if it's part of a bundle or if it's a weekly discount, those sort of things. So it doesn't really show up until it's in your cart. Another thing that you would want to do potentially is if you're a big Pathfinder fan, if you go to the store in the drop-down menu or in Fantasy Grounds itself, I'm going to go right click. I'm going to get out of this, go to exit session, go to return to launcher. And once I'm in this page here, you can go to, let's go to settings, I believe it is. And in the settings, under account, you can link your Steam account and you can link your Paizo account. So what this does is if you use Steam, you have to essentially bring up Steam and you want to go to remove or refresh Steam purchases whenever after it's connected. You hit this refresh, it'll look at Steam and go, okay, and it'll pull all your purchases in to Fantasy Grounds. And then you click update on Fantasy Grounds and that will pull in all the stuff that you've purchased. So that's one way to do it. Or you can use the drop down on the actual website and use that. So you can come here, you can use the Steam link here, or here's the Paizo account synchronization. So if you own content on the Paizo store, so not the physical books, but the actual digital PDFs, you can retrieve once you connect the accounts, you can retrieve all this and it'll remember what you own. So when you buy stuff in Fantasy Grounds, you get whatever the difference is usually between the PDF and Fantasy Grounds. Vice versa, if you buy it on Fantasy Grounds first and then you send all your purchases over, when you go to the Paizo store, you can download the PDF because you've essentially already purchased that and the Fantasy Grounds version. So you can grab your PDF essentially for free in a sense. Not really free, but it's part of the purchase. So when you're buying stuff directly from the Fantasy Grounds store, you're directly buying the PDF and the digital copy for Fantasy Grounds. If you're going to already have owned that stuff and you want to kind of go to the Fantasy Grounds version, you get the difference in price from there. And then if you click on see personal discounts, when I'm in here, this will show me what stuff is discounted that I haven't purchased yet. So for instance, I already own this Sea of the Inner Gods, right? So if I'm going to buy it on Fantasy Grounds, it's going to be $9.99, where it was normally $22.99 because I already own it. So this shows you your discounts if you have product that you own. So if I want to buy the Starfinder Character Operations Manual for Path or for Starfinder, it's going to charge me $30 because I already own the PDF. So I'm getting $9 or $10 off at that point. So that little button there will let you know what you own or what's reported. And then you can come in here and say, oh, okay. So you can see your discount at this point, and you'll be able to tell if you want to go and buy it. So these are all my discounted prices for owning the PDFs. And you can get the PDFs really cheap if you hit one of those humble bundles. So quite often, at least once or twice a year, Paizo will have a humble bundle. Quite often it's older content or stuff that's already been out for about a year. And you can buy those for dirt cheap, like $30 for like 20 books or something like that. When you do that and you register those on the PDF store at Paizo, and then you synchronize them with Fantasy Grounds, you get that discount. So why not take advantage of it? If you ever see those Humble Bundle sales and you only have a couple PDFs and a couple of Fantasy Grounds modules, do yourself a favor and buy those, like $30 or usually is what it is. Synchronize your account, and it will basically give you the difference between the cost of the PDF and the cost of Fantasy Grounds. So that's a really good deal to get in on. Steam right now is pretty much the only one, or not Steam, but Paizo is pretty much the only one doing that. There might be some others that kind of do stuff like that, but there isn't anything automated like this. You'd have to go to the rule set people, and they might give you a discount somewhere else or something, if you really complain about it. But the only ones who've really set this up officially and have an agreement in place is Paizo and Smiteworks. Paizo is also doing this, I believe, in Foundry, but the Fantasy Grounds was the first one. I think they're like test pilot for that. So this is a cool system to use if you're going to use Pathfinder products. So the last thing I wanted to talk to you about is the Atlassian. So this is kind of like their new wiki guide. If you look for wiki guide, it usually takes you to the old wiki guide. You want to go to the Fantasy Grounds Atlassian. Quite often there's some how-tos. You can submit a problem, like if you're having a money issue or maybe you want a refund or whatever, you can do the support ticket. That'll take you to this portal and you can report and do it through here. If you do it through here, it's easier to track. And what's nice about this is we don't really care. Once we get our money back or we're satisfied, that's good. But how this helps Fantasy Grounds is it tracks the issue. So if this issue comes up again, they can go, oh, we've already dealt with it like this, and they can track it that way, and then they can offer a solution to the next person. So that's what's nice to have a tracked Fantasy Grounds support system, and that way they can build an FAQ and say, this is how we handle it. So this is kind of the better way to suggest to get help. You can go to the Discord. You can go to, to the Fantasy Grounds House of Healing, but it's better to do anything more serious here on the customer support. So usually things are tied with money, any of those sort of things. You can report like bugs for the games. I wouldn't ask a question like, can my barbarian go up to second level? Those sort of things. I would save those for like the Fantasy Grounds forums or for Discord. But when it comes to Fantasy Grounds technical issues or Fantasy Grounds purchases or licensing, those sort of things, this is where you want to go. When it comes to a rule set where you want to know how to make a how to level up your barbarian or something, I would save that for the for the chat and for the more casual stuff. But nonetheless, this is a really good resource. Like, I really didn't use it for a long time, like the old wiki, but now that I understand how it works, it's kind of nice. So you have the support ticket, you have how-to articles, so there's some basic how-tos and a lot of nice links like the Zacchaeus's How Do You Do This, How Do I series. You click on that, that takes you through all these videos. And I've gone through a majority of these and added bookmarks. So if you go to how does line of sight work? So then it takes you to this video link. And if you go to the link from Zacchaeus, let's say this effect thing here, and I go down here, I've already put a YouTube link in here, and then I actually put all the timestamps in here. So I went and helped them out by putting in the timestamp so you can get to the thing you want. These videos aren't bad. They're only like, 5 minutes to 20 minutes tops. Some videos out there are like 2 hours long. So these are a lot more helpful. But if you want something specific, you can jump right to the topic. I went through most of these and put bookmarks in them. So these are all kind of like help files and tips and videos and stuff. So that's really helpful. And then you have troubleshooting guides. So if you're having problems with your network, in this case, reducing GPU usage. A lot of people complain, oh my God, this program is using way too much video memory. So there is a way to control that. Sometimes you have to do it through your software because it'll override the settings that you put in Fantasy Grounds. So there's a sync command that you can use to help limit how much of this. But you need to follow these instructions, and these will help reduce the amount of video memory problems that you might have. So these are the Fantasy Grounds commands to, and then reducing image quality sometimes when you have huge maps or something. You can do that too. So these are commands kind of help regulate that, but this will show you kind of how to use them. But if that's not working, you'll have to set it in your driver software, because a lot of times these will override the program settings. So it just really depends on your setup. And then for the other content, you have stuff that are specific to rule sets. You have things that are specific to Fantasy Grounds. So use this information. This is a really good resource. And what's kind of neat is if you go to a specific rule set and you want to know some things about it, and you're like, well, where the hell's the manual? I don't really have a manual. This is kind of like your manual. Okay. So these are just things that are going to be helpful to you in the long run. Maybe not in the short term, but at some point you're going to want to read something. So that's the troubleshooting articles. And if you find like maybe there's a certain rule set, like here's some tutorials and guides for Fantasy Grounds for 5th edition. There's different groups of things on here, but if you click on all content, you can find out for a different specific rule set, like what do you need and which rule set is it, and it'll kind of explain the interface. It'll show you different things, and what's nice is you can print out a custom manual. So if you come over here to the right and you click on these little dots and you go to export, you can export the pages as a PDF. So you can kind of build your own manual, if you want. So it says here you choose custom for your export PDF options, and then basically you can just print off the pages you want. So you don't have to have the whole thing. So you can export this. They changed the way it works, so it's kind of inconvenient now, but you can do it by page. So you can go to export to Word, or export to PDF. So you can kind of piece together your own stuff that you need. Like if you wanted to do like the effects wiki guide, you could do that. So have to get going. Have a good night. Yeah, see you later, guys. I think I'm done rambling. I think I gave you guys some pretty good resources and tips. But just remember, you're going to be heard more if you actually use the forums or that support portal. So when you do have a problem, you can go to the forums, provided you're signed in, and go to the House of Healing and provide them with whatever problem you are. And usually you want to give them the rule set, whether you're the player or the GM, maybe what kind of computer you're using, like Mac or Linux or PC, and go from there. A lot of people says, oh, I can't use this button or something. And they go, well, what rule set is it? Give them something to go on before you ask the question. But nonetheless, this is where you do that in the House of Healing. And that's probably your best bet. Your second best bet is to go on to Discord and go into the support forums there. So if I bring over, this is Discord if you haven't used it before. I'm going to click on the Fantasy Grounds Discord, and you go to the support channel. You can ask questions there. The next best thing, I think, is if you want, and you're part of Fantasy Grounds Academy, we have an Ask the Expert section, and you can ask there too. So there's your third support. So if you got 3 different ways to look for help. So you can go to the portal, you can use the Atlassian, or you can use the official Fantasy Grounds Discord, or you can use our community one. So it kind of depends on the nature of what you need. So this is just your resources. You got, your places to go, and you got things you can do, and you also have. I gave you guys some tips on how to navigate through the interface of Fantasy Grounds, and then also just kind of getting familiar with where things are at, because it is kind of scattered. Like you'll find one answer in the forums, you'll find one over on the Atlassian, you'll find one in Discord, so you'll kind of get used to that. I kind of wish it was all centralized, but it's kind of not possible because everybody has their own preference as to what they want to do and how they want to get the information. Some people watch videos, some people read, some people just want the answer. There's just so many different ways to consume content. So it really depends on what your needs are and your ability to learn and how familiar you are with the platform. So just keep that in mind. Hopefully this is helpful. I know I talked and rambled a lot, didn't show a whole lot, but I think tomorrow I will do a Chat GPT video. But for today, I kind of wanted to come back and revisit this help video because I tried to do one the other day, and for some reason the damn audio cut out, and that was annoying. But anyways, you guys take care. And later on, when the video is cached and once YouTube has done their thing, I will put a bookmark in there or like a timestamp. So if you need to know something specific, you don't have to go through this whole video. So take care, everyone.